everybody, I'm MJ Pinky. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about character death fakeouts and if you should do them, what some repercussions of them might be, and some considerations. So, I have a scene where two of my characters are thrown off of a cliff. And I did this obviously to create tension in the narrative and also to provide more traumatic experiences for character growth. So they may or may not die from being thrown off the cliff, and other characters may or may not be impacted by them being thrown off of the cliff. So I had mixed reviews on this scene from my critique group. The majority of readers didn't mind the fake out, but then a couple of them had problems with it. So the we don't mind death fake outs camp cited that it's a tropey thing where if you throw your characters off of a cliff and we don't see them dead, then it's kind of an expected thing that they're going to come back. The other side was the I don't like character death fake outs camp. Didn't like it because it cheapens the impact of death and it serves to lessen the tension for the overall story. Because if you have a scene where someone's thrown off of a cliff, but then the consequences for that aren't realistic, then your readers are going to interpret that as cheap. So both of these camps are very legitimate feedback. So I'm just going to delve a little bit deeper into each one so that you can decide if character death fake out scenes are appropriate for your story. So after getting this feedback on the scene, it led me down the path to figure out ways to remedy the tension loss from death fake outs. Because I definitely think that the no character death fake out camp was onto something about the tension loss. It's kind of like watching a soap opera, you know? It's like, oh, they fell down an elevator shaft, they're not dead. Or, oh, their boat sank, whatever, they're gonna come back in another season. You know, it's just something that you kind of like learn to accept, but it definitely lessens the tension. One suggestion to remedy this tension issue was that it just appears that they both died, but maybe one of them isn't discovered to be alive until a later book in the future. So the reader is led to believe that the character is dead. The characters in the story are led to believe that the character is dead. But then later on, after several books and after everybody's kind of processed the grief, the character can come back and we can learn, well, what exactly happened. So that was one suggestion that kind of shows a permanent impact of the scene in the same way that a real character death would. There's obviously a impact to the characters, there's an impact to the story, and there's an impact for the reader for a while until that character comes back. So that was one way to kind of keep the tension there. Whereas if they are tossed off of a cliff and in the next chapter or in the next 2 or 3 chapters they come back and they're like fine, then yeah, that scene kind of demolished the effect of deaths in my story, which is not good. The other idea for keeping that tension high for character death fake outs is to have the injuries from this experience be so critical and near to death that the character's permanently impacted by the experience. So and what I mean by that is, like, you know, when you have a character death, it's a permanent thing. There's grief, trauma, resentment, anger, guilt. These are experiences that your character will need to go through after a character death. And it's really, really important that you give your character space to do that, because your reader also needs to go through that. So if you just gloss over it super fast, like, oh, I just spent a whole book building up this character and now I just kill them off, and like 2 chapters later, life goes on and the characters are over it. You don't give your readers enough time to process that. You don't give your characters enough time to process that. So, in the same vein, if you're going to do 2 character fake out deaths and they're both going to be alive and they're both going to be known to be alive soon after the scene, give them some permanent thing that happens from it, like a permanent injury or something of that nature, a consistent reminder of that experience, so that they can have that guilt, that anger, that resentment, and then let your characters grapple with those emotions in the same way they would if it was like a real character death. So there's a lot of things to think about here. What I really had to consider from this feedback is what's going to have the strongest impact on my readers, and how will my decision with this chapter where I toss 2 of my characters off a cliff, how is this going to affect reader expectations for my future books? So those are really the 2 things, and I've already talked about those briefly, but those are the 2 things that I really had to think about with this. There's not a lot left for this book. So this is kind of in the place where my reader's impression of my book is going to be largely based on how I end it. And if I don't take the time and the care to deal with these scenes, these ending scenes appropriately, then the reader's going to have a bad taste in their mouth. They're going to be like, wait a second, I just spent all this time reading this book and investing my time in this book and these characters, and then it ends like this. It's like Game of Thrones season 8. Like, we've spent 7 seasons falling in love with these characters, and then you're going to end it like that. Are you kidding me right now? So we don't want a Game of Thrones situation to happen here. So if you are fake deathing your characters towards the end of your book, make sure that you do it in a way that satisfies the reader, and doesn't destroy the tension you've built, and doesn't negatively impact reader expectations for future books that are going to follow this one. Because, I mean, obviously, fake death scenes can be very tension driving. They can be very shocking. They can get your reader flipping pages super quickly. But those are all very short-term things, which are fine. I mean, that's the reason why, part of the reason why I wanted to have mine in here. But the feedback from my critique group was very helpful in helping me think about the long-term effects of this. The short term is fine, but the long term is almost more important than the short term, because we want to make sure that the reader is satisfied, and that they want to continue reading my future books, and that I'm not kind of like pigeonholing myself into this idea that death has no meaning for my readers, especially if I have deaths planned in future books, which I do. So I definitely don't want to cheapen that outcome and that expectation for the reader. So that's all I have for you guys for this video. I hope you have found this insightful and enlightening in your own quest to determine if a fake character death is appropriate for your story, or if a real character death is appropriate for your story, and a few things that you can think about if you're going to incorporate these, and how to really make it land like you want it to land. So anyways, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much for joining. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in a future video. Happy writing.